Wow, Eric, congratulations, man! What a crazy match.
Thanks. That was yeah, you described it well. Crazy.
You probably had no idea what Dave was playing? What were you even able to figure out as you were playing? Tell me about things from your perspective.
Wow, there are a lot of things going on in my mind in that one. Yeah, I didn't. Obviously, I thought he like boarded in things like chains and stuff and echoing tourists and all these cards that then I end up seeing like game ones later on. And he built basically a metagame deck for the type of decks that me and Luis and Steve like to play. I'm not sure who he worked with for this one. We haven't talked about it because I just got back from the GP late last night, and he's been busy with a lot of real life stuff, so I haven't had a lot of opportunity to talk even today. So yeah, he really came to the table with something. I mean, I love my deck. I started thinking about it some few weeks ago when I was really unhappy with my deck. Coming back from Hawaii, we had not a ton of time to prepare for the third trimester, and I went on some of these forums. I saw a deck that looked cool, the Angel City Vault deck, and it had things like Mind's Desire and Time Spiral and cards that people hadn't really played a lot of in this league, and I thought that no one else would play, and so I'm like, I'm kind of excited to just play a Yawgmoth's Will deck. I mean, I love Yawgmoth's Will. Of course, the card is completely bonkers, and I've never gotten a chance to do like really broken things. I played mono blue twice, and I had another like mono blue control deck that I was considering playing, and a blue white control deck with like Rest in Peace, expecting all the Delve cards I was planning on playing. Yep. Raptor asked me at the GPs, like at the PT, are you gonna come with another mono blue deck? And I'm like, I don't know, I might. I ended up playing that deck. Steve and Dave ended up playing very similar decks, and I really felt it was poorly positioned for what we're doing. The deck is not bad by any means. I mean, I got a lot of ribbing for it. Of course, GPLA was the week after, and Tom and Luis and Dave and Josh and all these people were at the tournament, yourself, and a lot of people making fun of the deck. Of course, it went 0-3, got completely annihilated, looked completely outclassed, and yeah, I couldn't say anything. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I mean, I wish I hadn't played this deck. It does some powerful things, but it was not well tuned.
So where did this one come from?
So this one came from, I've been wanting to play Abrupt Decay for a long time. Each trimester, I'm like, God, Abrupt Decay look real good. I wish I had played an Abrupt Decay deck, but I really don't like the bug decks. And then, of course, Dig Through Time's printed. Just like, wow, like, I keep watching all these people cast Gush Fastbond. I'm like, I haven't got to do that. I really want to do that. Yawgmoth's Will is great in this deck. I can, have a Tinker for Blightsteel Colossus, and I can have a Tendrils Kill. I can play basically a control deck that goes off. Like, this is exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to play, and then it actually, like, some bug Gush decks did decent at Vintage Championships. And yeah, I ended up looking at those decks, and they were within a small handful of cards of what, I've been working on.
Steve put you on the 9th place deck from the
that deck. I looked at that deck, and it ended up being very similar to the deck I had been working on. And so, yeah, there were a bunch of cards in that deck I didn't like, and it gave me pause for thought, of course, because, a lot of these guys playing the Vintage Championships play much more Vintage than me. Not going to claim that I'm the most proficient Vintage player, but, sure. I've done pretty well building decks throughout my life, and I've thought a lot about the format and liked where I was coming from, and so I ended up really not making any changes based on the 9th place list. He was missing a lot of cards that I thought were pretty important. Things like he had like Tolarian Academy instead of Library. I can speak instead of Library of Alexandria, which really made no sense to me, and had a bunch of like regrowth effects and Noxious Revivals and Nihil Spell Bombs, which really didn't do anything for me. So I ended up just having the 60 that I had built, and ended up not actually making any changes based on that list. Although, again, like the final product is within not many cards. We're talking 6 to 10. So for the main deck, and then the sideboard ended up very similar as well. I was planning on playing a transformational sideboard, and the 9th place list also had the exact same setup of transformational sideboard that I had. Right. I wanted to play less Forbidden Orchards. I didn't think there was a need to play a lot of them because you can tutor for them and you bring it in creature matchups. But I ended up playing more of them anyway because I expected there's a reasonable chance that someone like Dave is going to come on Oath, which the card's just good against Oath anyway. So,
well, it certainly seems to have worked out there. I'm looking forward to hearing more of the details, but I do also want to get to our other match. So This one is going to be Luis Scott Vargas against Steve Menendian. The loser has to play you next week in the semifinals. The winner gets to take the week off and wait for the finals. So let's go ahead and head down to that game. Do you have a read on what these guys are going to be playing? Like, do you have theories or knowledge or?
Pretty sure because me and Luis were talking all day. He's playing my 75. And
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was going to say, like, oh, you want to talk about the deck more? Well, we'll get a chance. We've got it queued up once again. And Steve, we put on playing, he was likely to play either Delver or I thought there was a reasonable chance he'd go back to Doomsday.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Well, I see from the young Pyromancer in his hand that he seems to be on a Delver list.
Yeah. He's on Misdirection. Real surprise.
Of course, he's on Misdirection. I mean, not necessarily Delver the card, but Delver the archetype at a minimum. What does Luis have? He's going to turn one Demonic Tutor. What is? Wow, do you need a Brainstorm in that hand? Do you need? Oh, he goes Ancestral. Okay. It's awkward that he has the Blightsteel and the Tinker.
Yeah, it's not good. There's really no other Tinker targets in his deck. And the Ancestral looks awful against Steve's opening hand. He's got Flusterstorm, Misstep, and Misdirection. He's got literally everything.
Steve's not going to misdirect another Ancestral here, is he? Luis has to go for it.
Yeah, this game is... Wow.
Oh my god, Mr. Misdirection has it yet again. Last time these guys played, of course, last time these guys played, Steve did successfully misdirect Luis's Ancestral, but Luis won anyway.
Yeah. I mean, Steve has the Pyromancer already. Luis's hand, drawing another Dig Through Time, is the worst card probably in his deck. He already has Voice of Colossus, which would have formerly been the worst card in his deck.
Yeah, that's quite bad.
I mean, this game is as close as you can get to over for turn one where Steve didn't go off. He just played a land.
Yeah. It's not a turn one kill in the stat book, but it is damn close to a turn one kill. How is this matchup? Like, how does your guys' deck line up against what I'm going to keep calling Delver? Yeah, there's an actual Delver of Secrets now. I can call it Delver without even feeling bad.
Well, I mean, we played this deck with full knowledge that the most likely deck that Steve and Dave would both play would be this deck. So
fair enough.
I like where we stand.
What?
There's no bad cards.
Okay.
But yeah, of course, this deck is capable of amazing draws that you're not going to beat, and Luis's draw is quite poor and matched up very poorly against Steve's draw. So, double whammy there.
Yeah, Luis's draw would have been fine if he resolved that Ancestral. Well,
sure.
Technically, he did resolve it. Luis's draw would have been fine if that Ancestral had been pointed at him when it resolved.
Yeah, that would have made things a bit easier.
Yeah, now Steve's got Young Pyromancer. Wow, second Young Pyro. He's got a Flusterstorm and a Misstep. He's got 2 Gushes. And Luis has a Tinker with his only Tinker target in his hand.
Just got a text from my dad lamenting how terrible my hands were. But it's okay. We got there. 9 mulligans later, we got there.
Was it 9? I wasn't counting. You may have been counting.
What's 9?
Yeah, the number of hands with 3 oaths in them was pretty crazy.
To be fair, I had one hand that had 4 oaths in it. So
Right.
Yeah, I don't even know. I definitely had more oaths in my opening hands than lands.
Across all of them?
Including game 1s, where I don't have oaths in my deck.
That's funny.
And believe it or not, I'm playing more than 4 lands.
All right.
Yeah, and obviously things ended up working out in the end, so what are you going to say? Wow. Steve's hand is so good.
Yeah, Menendian floats a couple of mana and plays the Gush. I'm mildly surprised he didn't play the second Young Pyro first. But I guess he's really concerned about having blue mana up for counter magic fights. More worried about that than that extra token. Now here's a Delver. Now we know that Luis is on your 75. Steve does not know that.
Right. If Steve is worried about Luis having, he certainly is looking like a deck and has played in the past a deck that runs Toxic Deluge.
Right.
In which case, running out Young Pyromancer with only Flusterstorm protection might be risky. I mean, of course, Flusterstorm does a great job of protecting against 3 cast cost sorceries, but it's very easy for Luis to be able to
Yeah, no,
cast
you're right. He's slow
cast
rolling
some.
that young Pyro out of fear of a sweeper like a Toxic Deluge. I mean, all Luis has shown him is a DT and an Ancestral, and
Right.
he could very easily be on something way more controlish than
Right,
what we
which
know
is
him to
what
be
he's
on.
played basically every time is DT and Ancestral and Control decks.
Right.
So you can't really get a good read. Of course, Steve's hand is so well protected against that. Like even if Luis is able to go like land, thought sees you, he can misstep it, Flusterstorm, the Toxic Deluge. So he really is in a great spot.
In fact, Steve just discards the young Pyromancer. He is a big fan of playing the control game. He plays this Delver deck like a control deck. All right, Gush, you just point a Pyroblast at that, right? This is a main deck Pyroblast for Steve.
Yeah.
Speaking of metagame calls.
Well, that's one of the reasons why a lot of our disruption in this deck, where I started with a lot of thought seizes, because our league became a little inbred towards things like Pyroblast. So
Definitely.
I made sure to load up on some thought seizes.
Your thought seizes looked quite good. I was impressed by those for sure.
Yeah, they ended up not being great cards for, I talked a little bit. Luis ended up including Josh in our conversations to see what he thought about the deck, and he also was not impressed with Thoughtseize. Luis felt the same way. It wasn't very good in the Young Pyromancer decks, which makes sense. But in this type of deck where you're looking to tendrils go off,
Yeah,
it's a lot more powerful, and you can kind of. The problem with the deck like this is without Young Pyromancer, you can't really just cast Gushes and not go off because you're kind of upheavaling yourself, which is not a place to be. But at least if you're able to cast some Thought Seizes and things like that, you're able to keep the board in a position where you don't have to go off when you cast Gush. You can still do some things.
Wow. Luis was able to try a dig through time there after Steve pyroblasted his Gush, but Steve had the Flusterstorm for the dig, and he is this game. I mean, we thought this game was over on turn 1, and it just keeps somehow the gap between them keeps getting wider and wider. It's like he had the turn 1 kill and then snowballed from there.
Yeah, the using your DT to go get your ancestral and getting it misdirected is
not the where you want to start. Yeah, Luis has seen enough. All right.
Well, Steve does match up well against this deck. He will be the champion of this league. He's going to keep seeing it. It's all that's left.
So is Dave around? I know that we had talked about maybe chatting with him about his take on the quarterfinal match.
I don't know. I haven't seen him since the match ended. I'm on the top floor. He's on the bottom floor right now. So I don't know if he left or if he's around.
I had talked to him about trying to hang out on your webcam and give us his take on the match. He was convinced at this point that you would be complaining about how lucky he had gotten. It doesn't seem like that's how it actually played out.
To be fair, everyone got to watch that. I don't have to go like, oh man, I can't believe how much I mulligan. You have to go tell your friends, after a round of a PT, you're like, oh, you guys wouldn't believe it. I mulliganed 7 times in 3 games. Like, you saw me mulligan. Like, I don't have to say a damn thing. And so it was going to be interesting because I obviously thought I was going to lose the match and, come on and do commentary. And you'd ask me about it. And of course, I'd have to point out, like, well, I mulliganed 9 times to his 0 and a bunch of bad things happen where everyone's just going like, oh man, he's so salty, where you can't talk about a match where you lost without sounding salty because
the chat just likes the salt icon.
Happens. It just happens.
They don't need much of an excuse to go off with the salt icon.
Which is fine. Like obviously I'm used to it and I've been salty many times in my life. No big deal.
Same.
Rolls right off me at this point. But I mean, I'm just like kind of geared up for what the chat's gonna be like when I have to come on and talk about this match where I just mulligan into oblivion. But I ended up having some fortunate draws when it mattered most, and I took some very obscure lines. And actually, wish I could see the chat and the commentary. Obviously, I'm going to go back and watch the commentary, but I won't be able to see the chat to know what people thought because I definitely took lines that I don't think maybe anyone would take. Like I had a game plan in mind. It might have been wrong and bad. I fully admit it might have been wrong and bad, but I had how I thought the matchup was going to play out based on the cards I saw. I went for it in weird spots and didn't go for it in other spots. And
oh, sure.
Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. But
sure, Yeah,
I'm
the
kind
one
of
game
curious.
where you almost had the like natural lethal tendrils out of nowhere, but Dave figured out to force will your Black Lotus. That was a cool turn.
Yeah, that turn was insane. I hit exactly perfect. I'm like, wow, I can't believe I got lucky and got into this one. Everything looked over. I cast Black Lotus. It's just like force a bullet in a spot where not many people are just going to force a bullet that
Yeah,
card, and it's just
he
like,
had to read.
great, I'm dead. Yeah, Dave said he's around. I told him to come up.
All right, cool. Well, we're going on to game 2 here. I don't know how sideboarding affects this matchup, or I mean, do you believe that LSV should be favored in the matchup here, just not in that
Yes.
way that game 1 played out?
Well, game one played out. When you're favored in a matchup against a deck that's as strong as the one Steve's playing, you're not hugely favored. You like
Yeah,
where you're at, and if the cards line up evenly, you're gonna win because you have a small advantage. I mean, the Delver deck is so powerful. The threats are so cheap. The disruption is so cheap. I mean, it's all there. But of
yep,
course, yeah, I'm not sure exactly how Luis is going to play this out. If he's going to board in the Oath, which I would expect. He's got a lot of good cards for the matchup. Like I said, there was nothing in game one that was completely dead. There's one Hercules, which isn't good against Delver, but of course it can help you go off with Tendrils for Storm Count. And other than that, most of the cards are pretty good. I think for sure the Hercules came out and the Mystical Tutor came out because they're not good. And
sure.
from there, I'm not sure.
All right, well, Luis leads with a preordain. He's got his Black Lotus, but nothing to do with it. Steve
Right.
has, oh, geez, dropped in this direction again. He's got the turn 1 Ancestral, has his own Black Lotus, has Force of Will backup for the Ancestral. So this draw would seem like it's Edge Menendian.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you see draws like this and you think it's, of course, great for Steve because it's all Ancestral, but, he's using the card Ancestral and he's 2-for-1ing himself on the Force of Will, so he's not actually up as many cards. I mean, he's spending, 3 cards, Luis is losing 1, he's drawing 3, so he's basically
Sure.
getting a 2-for-1, which is good. You want it, but it's not like, oh, wow, this game's over again, he has Ancestral. This
Fair.
game is going to play out for a bit, which is nice because the last one did not. Of course, his Ancestral could just reveal 3 perfects, and there we go.
So what do you think Steve should do this on Luis's upkeep?
You're opening yourself up to cards like Flusterstorm. I'm not sure if he's afraid of that, but it's certainly
He
format.
could go for it main
He
phase.
saw me
He
cast
just
it
runs
last
this
round.
danger of... That's true. I don't think he knows what Luis is on, though.
No, it's unlikely. He didn't see much.
He didn't see much of Luis's deck at all beyond the first turn flurry.
Right.
Yeah, and it looks like Steve's going to go for this main phase. He runs the danger of resolving it without having to do a counter and then discarding a card, but I think you're right. That's better than opening up Flusterstorm. So Luis, of course, points a mental misstep at it. Steve doesn't have a misstep, so he has to force a will, which he does, and Ancestral resolves.
Right. And of course, he has no action now. He has plenty of great disruption, but this is not a bad spot for Luis when your opponent resolves Ancestral. He didn't fall super far behind. The game is still progressing normally.
Yeah, I mean, you traded misstep for force of will, and I forget what he pitched.
So I definitely think that you were right about Steve not knowing what Luis is on. Ancient Grudge, the targets are a few mana cards. It's like Luis is not playing Time Vault Voltaic, which he has played a lot. And Ancient Grudge is typically very good against Luis's decks. Those cards are not in his deck. So, I mean, while killing a Soul Ring is nice or a Mox can be
You
good,
might get this Black Lotus.
That is true. You absolutely can get this Black Lotus. And I assume will. It's kind of a weird spot because, Luis isn't going to assume that Menendian is going to assume that Luis is on. And so the odds of him having cards like Ancient Grudge and Ingot Chewer, I think that there's a reasonable chance Luis isn't even thinking that Steve doesn't know what he's on, which is probably the case. Because obviously Luis knows what all 4 people are on. And I think sometimes the thought process is just like, okay, they know what I'm on.
Right.
They're not going to have these cards. But that might not be the case right here. I mean, it might be, but
I didn't think you knew what Dave was on. I didn't know what Dave was on, and I could see his hands the whole time.
Yeah, I still don't know what he was on.
Right. That's part of the reason I wanted to chat.
3 matches. I don't know what he was on.
it looked like he had accurately predicted the metagame. Like he looked like he had a bunch of card choices, which should just have been good. I mean,
Yeah,
Chains in particular looked really good against all the gushing that was going on.
right. What ended up happening was I ended up after the first match, I boarded out my gushes and fast bombs.
Oh wow.
So I
Okay.
felt like the Oath Plan was going to be good against him. It's not amazing. I know
Right.
I saw Grafdigger's Cage and the like, but
Yeah,
you know I
here is
have
the
3
ancient
Abrupt Decays, I have Nature's Claims, I have my own mental missteps and counters and stuff that I decided to just, you know,
Luis responds to the grudge targeting Lotus with his ancestral. Now what happens? Misdirection happens, of course, because it's
hardcast
Mr.
forcible.
Misdirection. And
Hardcast
Luis
forcible sack.
cannot afford his to hardcast a Force of Will. Is that true?
Yeah, that's what he was going to do. That's why he
Oh,
didn't
he
respond
can't.
before the Ancient Grudge happened. Or part of the reason, obviously.
But
But
then, so Steve is going to be forced to sack his Lotus to Pyroblast, but he will.
yeah, well, he's getting an Ancestral out of the deal.
Yeah, exactly. He's not just, he's both countering and resolving one. Like that misdirection is so huge here.
And mental misstep would have been insane.
Yes. And the Ancient Grudge at the bottom of the stack no longer has a Lotus to blow up, but I think Steve's okay with that.
I can't believe how many times he has misdirection can protect it against Ancestrals. Like, this is.
Yeah. Pretty insane.
Yeah,
Unbelievable.
Steve has a reasonable enough hand to run away with this one.
Wow, so if Steve wins this, we have the 75 card mirror in the semis?
Steve loses this, then we get to see a rematch and then maybe a 75 card mirror in the finals.
Yeah, all of Steve's remaining opponents are on this list, so if
That
he
is
can beat it, that is really good news for Team Menendian.
Well, he is playing a deck that can beat anything. It's just, it may not be far ahead, but it can certainly win. He still has no threat, but 10 cards in hand versus 1 is a reasonable place to be.
It feels like Steve has the consistent version of this deck, and you guys have the broken version. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Makes some sense. Steve probably has a bit more permission outside of like hand disruption. He has more actual counter spells and pyroblasts. We have more different interaction. The thought seizes and the abrupt decays. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, Thoughtseize seems solid.
But yeah, it's dig versus treasure cruise again, and
So it is. How many dig through times?
2.
2 digs versus probably 4 cruises. Not that we've seen one from Steve yet. He's been too busy drawing 3 with Luis's ancestrals.
Sure.
No threat though, like you said. This game could play out a little longer.
Yeah, I mean, Luis needs some good draw phases, but it's certainly possible to get them.
He's gonna go ahead and gush.
Sure. He doesn't have a land drop anyway, and
More Pyroblasts.
yeah, I'm not sure. I honestly could not put a percentage on this game. I don't know how far behind Luis is right now. You know, having the Abrupt Decay in hand means that any threat that Steve draws, be it Fast Bond or Young Pyromancer, is not going to stick around. So he can't be that far behind, but
he's
clearly,
way behind on cards.
right. Clearly, he's pretty far behind, but I don't know how far behind that actually is. Like what the sequence of draws that will best affect this game is.
Right.
You know, he resolves one dig through time, and all of a sudden, you know, back
Yeah.
in business. But that Force of Will is strong.
Huh. Steve gushes by picking up the lands there when he could have actually hardcast it end step.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have a land drop anyway, so in those type of situations,
Sure.
you know, he's going to want to follow it up with some kind of threat, whatever he happens to draw.
What he drew was a treasure
He's
cruise.
discard a million.
He's gonna go ahead and cruise.
Yeah, might as well.
Man is floating. Big boat full of gold. How do you feel about that, Luis? I think Luis is
Luis
going to
likes
have
to be
to
the one
allow it.
casting cruises.
Good news for Luis Scott Vargas fans is that Steve looks like he may have to discard here. He doesn't find anything off his ponder. Huh.
Yeah, I mean, this game looks strangely reminiscent to their match in the Swiss, where Steve at one point had a hand of just like 7 counter spells, and
Yep.
Luis won 30 turns later. I don't think he's in nearly as good a position this game. Of course, in that game, Luis had a handful of stuff as well, so at
Right.
least he was, more in that game. But you know,
Steve might have sideboarded out his Delvers. That's what he did in the last matchup.
sure, entirely possible. But I mean, there are plenty of young pyromancers left.
You'd think. He's got, what, 9 cards in his hand?
It looks like 9, if not more. I think 9 now.
Yeah, it's possible some have scrolled off to the right, but I think it's 9.
9 seems like a reasonable number.
It is pretty interesting the way Steve plays this as a control deck.
Yeah.
Discards a Scalding Tarn. And a Tropical. He discards down to no lands?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you keep one hand? Wouldn't you keep one land in that hand?
The fact that he can just play Gush and hit land drops again is, means that he doesn't necessarily have to do that, but it would be my instinct to keep a land, yeah.
Yeah, one land lets you hard cast a Gush. Oh, you're just going to draw Strip Mine off the top. Okay. Well, had he pondered that there? If he pondered Strip Mine to the top, then his decision makes a lot more sense.
You can't exactly see where cards go in their different zones very well.
Right. Luis draws Grizzlebrand.
Seems about right. He's a Lotus
Yeah.
away. Of course, Lotus is dead, but
What's the creature set you guys have?
main deck, there's a Blightsteel Colossus.
Okay.
And the sideboard has some Gristlebrands.
So when you sideboard into the Oath Plane, you take the Grizzlebrand, you take the Blightsteel out?
Depends on what you're expecting to face. I mean, you can go 1 Gristlebrand, 1 Colossus if you think Tinker's going to be good in the matchup. Against Dave, I took out the Blightsteel because he's got things like Dak Vaden,
Okay.
Truth, and the like.
Wow, yeah, the last game you won, I was kept contemplating Tinker lines that seemed like they made sense, but I eventually, you ignored enough of the potential Tinker lines that I was starting to think you'd probably sideboarded it out.
Yeah.
Because you had a Demonic Tutor, and you wound up, both Steve and I thought you could Demonic Tutor for Tinker in a spot where you eventually wound up Demonic Tutoring for an Oath.
Right, I ended up drawing an Oath. I was looking to draw either a green Mana Source or an Oath, or something similar that you're 1 card of a 2-card combo where I could go get the other one. That's why I just sat on the Force of Will and kind of let him do whatever he needed to do, because I thought I'd only have 1 chance to try to go off, more or less. Of course, this game was looking like it is back to the being over phase, as Luis had the very worst draws in his deck back-to-back.
Back-to-back Grizzlebrands, and Menendian's Oath gives him a couple of young Pyros to finally mop up the game with.
I believe those are the only 2 dead draws in Luis's deck, so Runner Grizzlebrand is pretty unfortunate.
Well, the good news for Luis is that he's not eliminated. This just means he has to play a semifinal match.
He's playing against me in Vintage. He's eliminated.
Oh, ho, ho.
My record against Luis is very good. But, it's going to be a 75-card mirror, so he's way luckier.
Mulligan 10 times again? And draw more Oaths than lands across your draws?
Probably.
Worked last time.
Yeah. I think that we should just go back and use the footage from when we did our Vintage challenge of best-of-5 matches and decide that you can just re-show it and you can do commentary on that. That would be great. Beat Luis pretty handily in that one.
Almost as badly as he beat Martel.
You have to see the very end of this game, Steve.
Yeah, I was watching it. It was not close.
Oh, hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Hello. This doesn't seem nearly as exciting as our games were.
You guys played some awesome games.
Yeah, we are much more entertaining people than these two. There's just no arguing it at this point.
Yeah, this doesn't seem like it's going to last much longer.
No,
I don't know if you had a rooting interest, Eric. You probably wanted the Delver matchup against Menendian, since that's what you were expecting to build the deck to play against.
Well, yeah. Plus, I'd like to just face Luis in the finals. It works out pretty nicely.
Wow. He misdirected Luis's Ancestral in both games. That's actually a thing that we just watched happen, isn't it?
Luckily, that's never happened to me in my life.
He's got a grip of, what is that? 5 counters, a Fire, Ice, and a Gush. Attacking with Young Pyromancers. What
I think Steve's ahead.
He's a little bit ahead. That's our story.
You can just cast everything and just win right now.
Right.
All right,
Wow.
so
Dave, tell us about your deck. Where did that come from? What was the thought process?
Well, I had been. The funny part is, before I even get to that deck, is so me and Eric worked together for the first 2/3, and we were on the same list, and then we both somehow ended up on the same list for the third. And I was certain I was going to play Oath up until like last night, which would have been pretty funny for us to end up again on the same deck. But
Sure.
I was just kind of looking through results, just kind of searching for ideas all over. I really was confident all 3 of them would be playing blue decks, and I felt like because you're locked on the deck for the playoffs, there's no shot anyone would take a shot and play like Dredge or Shops out of these 3 players.
Yep.
Like myself, I think if we could have switched, I might have brought Dredge this week and then like switched for next week, but I didn't want to be stuck on Dredge if I were to win the whole way through, because that just doesn't seem fun. So I knew I wanted a deck that was really good against blue decks, and in particular Gush and Treasure Cruise, because Steve loves Gush and Luis loves Treasure Cruise, and Ephro likes to draw cards too. So and just looking around, I ended up coming across some guys with chains in some tournaments, and I noticed it was pretty sweet with deck. So I built it and started taking things out and kind of tuning it a little bit and playing it on Magic Online. And I went, I think, 8-0, and then Bob was helping me test. He played it for me today and calls me. He's like, yeah, you should play this deck. I just went like 6-0 myself and just never lose anything. And we played pretty much, one matchup against Pyromancers, and I got crushed. But actually, I didn't even get crushed. I had to leave. So take that back. I had to go, so we conceded. So actually, I went like 14-0 in matches. And I just felt like Chains is a really sweet card by itself. And then with Dak, it's pretty broken. I felt like Dak was positioned because I actually thought that these guys would be bringing Blightsteel back. Like, Blightsteel's been gone for a while. Mm-hmm. People have been playing Inkwell, but I think I correctly predicted, and 2 out of the 3 opponents possible were playing Blightsteel. So I felt Dak is good there. It's good for just value. And then with the Chains, it's just fantastic. So once I started putting that all together, and then, Deathrite Shaman was good again because it was giving you mana to cast these cards really quickly. Got to play Bob again, and I got to sort of ignore the Delve that everyone else is doing in case somebody came with some Rest in Peace or some kind of technology against Delve. I was, not on that, and Dark Confidant naturally goes with Chains because you're not drawing the card, so it also kind of matches up.
Meanwhile, of course, Menendian continues to just make Young Pyromancer tokens. Sorry to interrupt you, but...
No, I mean, this is just, his hand is Gristlebrand, Tropical Island. So.
Right, versus a grip full of counters and a bunch of card drawing, and this game was over. So, keep going.
I actually felt that the deck I had was really good for, these 3 decks. I felt like the Oath matchup in general was normally pretty good. I mean, I have Abrupt Decays, and then I have Cages and Nature's Claims. But Eric's deck, I couldn't really figure out what it was doing. So, like, when he Tendrils me the first game, I'm like, okay, so he's on some kind of Gush Tendrils deck. I actually thought there was a chance he had an Oath. So to hedge, I brought in 1 Cage for game 2 of the first match. And I took out my Will, because I felt, worst case, it stops his Yawgmoth's Wills. I took out most of my Snapcasters, and then the match proceeded. And then he played Oath. I'm like, okay, I guess I want to bring in more of these Graph-Digger's cages. But then I got Tendrils again in another game, and I got Colossus one game. So I'm just like, I couldn't really figure out. It was sort of like a rock, paper, scissors thing. Like, is he on the Colossus? Is he on the Tendrils? Is he on the Oath? Like, I knew he didn't likely have Tinker, Oath, together with Colossus, because you don't really want to oath into Colossus sometimes,
Sure.
because then you just still lose the next turn. So I still wasn't sure exactly what he was doing. So that's why, if you notice in the final game, I abrupt decayed his Soul Ring, because I felt like he had Tinker but was waiting to cast it with like a counter backup, because he had 2 blue. He tapped the blue and played the Soul Ring and paused for a bit and then passed. He could have tinkered there, but he wouldn't have been able to counter other than Force of Will. So
yeah,
I
that's
thought,
what Steve and I expected him to do too. Steve and I had him on a tinker plan.
Yeah, I'm like, he's going to tinker here, and I don't want to leave him with an artifact. I'm like, but I really want to save this for the oath, but maybe he took his oaths out because he knows I have cages and abrupt decays. So, and I'm like, it also stops, bottlenecks his mana. He's only got 2 lands anyways, and he might have a Jace. So I decided to abrupt decay instead of Nature's Claim, because I had both, the Soul Ring. But maybe I should have Nature's Claim, because if he counters it, then I can always just untap an abrupt decay. But I really didn't want to give him 4 life if it resolved either, because my plan was to just try to win with the Deathrite Shaman and the token. And I felt like the more life I gave him was the more turns, and the more likely he's going to find something broken to do to me. Because his deck does broken things, and my deck kind of just looks for value and kind of chops you down and gets you card by card and kind of tries to take over slowly. So I didn't want to give him time. That's why, even though he mulliganed a lot, he's able to mulligan and find these robust cards that, like, and he can mulligan the 3 cards, but if he just goes turn 1 oath and I don't have a way to deal with it, I just lose. Or he has things he can do where he can just win the game, whereas I'm just kind of chopping away, resolving a Bob, trying to counter your spells, wasteland you, which is another reason why I really like the deck, because I felt like Wasteland and Strip Mine are really powerful, especially in the VSL. It just seems like everyone's decks have been susceptible to that, and not many people have been playing Wasteland and Strip Mine. So I felt like for this, I really wanted to have Wasteland and Strip Mine for all these kind of decks.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir in my case. I totally get it. I thought the field was soft to Wastelands the whole time.
The first time you played a Wasteland was so tilting.
Right, so I'm really happy with the deck I chose. I would do it again in a heartbeat,
No, the deck looked good, and I was talking with Luis doing the commentary. He felt like you had the matchup advantage. I mean, just felt like Eric played out of some tough spots and caught a couple breaks. Not his opener draws, but some of the mid game draw phases worked out pretty well.
One of the unfortunate things about that final game, though, is I had 0 lands left in my deck other than 2 Wastelands.
Wow.
I drew all my lands, and I'm only playing 12 lands plus Strip Mine and Wasteland, and then Moxes. And I kept drawing lands and Moxes in that period where we were both just sitting there, and he had Volcanic Island, and it's like I needed to draw some sort of business in there.
Yep.
But, that happens, draw lands, and I was still kind of making a game of it. And I think if I played my Abrupt Decay differently and held on to it for the oath, I might have been able to have a shot in there. But I'm happy either way. I got top 4. I get to come back. 3 friends, 3. I'm friends with everybody in the league, but 3 of the people I'm probably closest with, other than Bob, are there. So it's pretty cool. I'm happy.
Yeah, no, the deck looks sweet. I mean, it was a hell of a run just to get into the playoffs. 4th place, pretty solid finish for you.
Yeah, I wish I got to play some more matches with the deck, because I really, really think the deck is sweet. Like, I'll probably post a deck list or actually, you're going to post a deck list. I think it's actually a really good deck list right now for Magic Online. I mean, I went 8-0 and Bob went 6-0. We're just crushing everything. Shops was really a fun matchup, because people would get mad in the chat and like, oh, you're so lucky. So I'd just be like, let's rematch. And they would jump back to the queue again and get beat
Why
again.
is it good against Shops?
Deathrite Shaman is just really powerful for accelerating your mana. You can cast stuff through Thorns and Spears, and you can just cast it through a Spear. Dak Faden is just great. Frequently, I would play like a Deathrite Shaman. They would play like a Spear, and then a turn later, I'd have a Mox out too. I would just play Dak and steal their things. Dak's really great.
Oh, sure,
Dark
Dak.
Compound's fantastic. I mean, I have 3 Daks in the deck. Chains is pretty bad, but you can sideboard it out easily for Trigons. So,
very nice.
Yeah,
deck looks sweet. Everybody seems like they had a sweet deck this time around. I liked your deck. I mean, LSV and Efro seem like they're on a very similar 75, which is kind of a cool plan. I mean, Steve's deck looks a little bit more straightforward in some ways, but in other ways, it's probably just the best deck in the format right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was the thing. I felt like he was probably going to play that, and I thought I might be assumed to play that, which is another reason I switched. As Eric said, he thought me and Steve were most likely to play that deck, and I kind of told myself, people think that, so I don't want to do what they think, so there's no way I'm going to cast, a Pyromancer this week. I just want to be on something that can do something different against decks that are good against Pyromancer, which I felt would be Oath. So I kind of took it to the next level, because I was originally going to play Oath for that reason, because it's good against Pyromancers, but I felt, well, if they're smart, they're going to play Oaths too, so I want a deck with Abrupt Decays that's good against Oath. So I tried, but it didn't work out.
All cool stuff. All right. Well, that'll pretty much wrap things up for the first playoff week here. We've got Steve Menendian is our number 1 seed, wins the tiebreaker against Luis Scott Vargas. He is sitting in the finals where he is going to be taking on either Eric Froelich or Luis Scott Vargas. They're going to play each other next week. So there's a good look at the bracket. We'll clean up the LSV Menendian tiebreaker and show you that next week's show is the one match. It'll be Luis versus Ifro. And then the week after that, the final match, Steve Menendian takes on the winner.
It's going to be
right.
2 out of 3 mirror matches, right? Next week.
Next week is best 2 out of 3 match, best 2 out of 3 mirror matches. Exactly the way you said it.
That's going to be really a doozy.
Well, I mean, the way that deck plays out though, it's like both players trying to do broken stuff. I don't know. You've also got this like, do I sideboard in the oaths? Do I not sideboard in the oaths? I don't even know how that plays out. I mean, on the one hand, it sounds like a mirror match, but vintage. I mean, they're both very vintagey decks too. So I think it winds up being pretty interesting.
I'm glad I didn't play Oath. I think Eric's deck is better for the Oath mirror against a deck without the extra like things going on, like the tendrils. And I think
I mean, it's Oath sideboard, by the way. I don't know if you've gotten to actually hear that part yet, but Oath out of the sideboard makes a lot of sense to me. Having access to Oath in a field where there might be a lot of Delver makes sense, but not being reliant on it also makes a lot of sense, I think. All right, well, thanks for hanging out with us, Dave. Definitely glad we got to hear your take on it. Congratulations, Eric. We will see you next week. I think I'm going to wrap things up for Vintage Super League. 1 week of playoffs down. Come back next week, and we'll see who's going to go to the finals and try to take down Steve Menendian. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you guys next week.